All right, we're on air. It is January 3rd. This is our first developer meeting since the new year, so happy new year, everybody. Today we're going to focus on reviewing the issues that were slated for Backdrop 112, talk about what got in, maybe what isn't going to get in, and stuff that we should be focused on between now and release date. So before we get into that, we have one new contributed module I wanted to highlight. It's ZERB 2020. And this is a pretty cool project that allows you to do a comparison between two images. So if you have, I actually had this use case very recently on a Drupal 7 site, where if you have an image from like 20 years ago and one from today, and you want people to be able to see the differences between the two of them, this is a great tool that will allow you to do that. So thank you for working on ZERB 2020. It's exciting to see that for Backdrop. For our websites, we are working on issue number 442 about improving the process of selecting module themes and layouts on backdropcms.org. That is underway. Hopefully will come soon now that we've hit feature freeze. But more exciting than that, the forum site, we had some problems with node preview, which I believe are now fixed. Joseph filed another pull request that I believe has resolved the issue with comment preview memory consumption. It's a little bit of a hack, but it worked, so I deployed it. We can give it a go. And then later on, if we want to figure out why our custom module required a bit of the hack, we can revisit. But because it worked, I figured better to get it up there. So I put a to-do in the code, revisit later, and deploy. So Happy New Year. If anyone notices any other issues with the forum site using it this year, I think that process is great for like create an issue, bring it up in one of these meetings, and then we'll ask for a volunteer to help us fix it. So hopefully we can get them rolled out pretty quickly if we hit any other snags. All right, so that's it for general announcements. Let's turn it over to Nate to talk about Backdrop CMS.
All right, man, it was one action-packed week because, let's see, what was that? Tuesday, New Year's Day, was the last day of feature freeze, or last day of feature thaw, and the beginning of feature freeze. And so we were rushing to get in the last bits of functionality into the 1.12 release that will be coming out in 12 days. So that's very exciting. We've got all kinds of things that have gotten merged in. But first, let's put a pause on 1.12 and talk about the 1.11 bug fix release and things that have gotten in there. So last week when we met up, we said that we were going to hopefully finish out the Drupal 7.61 crossports, and that is issue 3375. All remaining issues there have all been merged. Thank you very much, Clonos, for making just about every single one of those pull requests, and Herbduel for reviewing almost every single one of them. So that was an awesome tag team effort there to get all of those crossports made from Drupal over into Backdrop. Let's see, there's also some other 1.11.4 issues that were merged in, lots of small bug fixes here and there. And there is still a couple of things that I would like to call attention to, that even though they're in the 1.11.4 queue, there's something that we would like to have completed as soon as possible, even though the next release will probably be 1.12. So the 1.11.4 queue currently has about 50 issues in it. And if you're looking for things to work on that would be for sure, part of the 1.12 release, that bug fix queue is really the best place to look for like small issues that can be worked on right now that will definitely get into the 1.12 release. Because they will also be in the 1.11.4 release, which will probably come out the same day as 1.12. So issues in particular that could be worked on in that bug fix release include issue 3209, which is adding predefined color schemes to the basis theme. Issue 2873, which is the maintenance page, basically for, is this maintenance page or is this something else? The installation requirements page looks broken. Oh, I think that's something different. So if there's install requirements that aren't met, then the page doesn't look quite right. Is issue 2873. Let's see, a really minor issue. Certain tests are missing the type attribute in their info file. Oh, actually, this looks like something slightly different. There's a problem with core update. Is this core updates? Oh, okay. I haven't read over this issue. Sorry. There's a problem with we added the ability for core to self-update in 1.12. And the core updates themselves might fail due to some checking of properties that shouldn't actually be checked in the .info files, it looks like. That is issue 3447. Is there anything you'd like to add there, Jen, on that?
No, just that I think that that's important. If we're going to be exposing the ability for people to do the updates, we should address all of the bugs that we know exist with updates. And I know we've done that for a handful of them already, and this is just one that seems to be an outlier, so I'd love to get it fixed before.
And this doesn't seem to happen to everybody, right? It seems to happen just to some people.
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry about my cat sounds.
Just to me.
Oh, it just happens to you, Tim? I'm sure you're not the
only happens to me.
Okay, and lastly, another small issue is that the RTL formatting, right to left, text display in some places doesn't work correctly in Basis, and that's issue 3435.
There's actually a ton of RTL pull requests in the queue because we've got language users now that are using different languages that go the other way. And so it would be really nice if we could kind of go through the that milestone and see how many of those we can get merged and cleaned up before the next release. So if anyone is really good at testing left to right, right to left, language switching, I think that would be really easy to just kind of go through that queue and knock all those out.
Okay. Yeah, and as I said before, the 111.4 issue queue has 50 other issues in it, and those are probably the best place to look for work that can be done right now that will be part of 112 and 111.4. Okay, let's go to 112 and talk about the things that are complete or not complete for the 112 release. So let's see, we'll go through the items that we almost always go through week after week and talk about which ones made it. So the first one is adding a class to the link dialog in Seek Editor. So when you select a link and then select text and then add a link to it, you can now also add a class to links that are inserted into the rich text editor. That issue has been merged and it's part of 3307. Next one up is tags for modules, one of the oldest issues that we've got that are still that was still open, and that's issue number 37. So this one has also been merged. Yay! I'm so glad that one we can finally get that in and stop talking about that particular issue. So this makes it so that tags can now be placed on modules via their .info files. We talked about this earlier in the UX meeting. So for more information, you can kind of watch that video for details. Core updates. The big meta issue is issue number 2018. Of those meta issues, we have gotten in one additional item for 1.12, and that is the ability to enable the user interface for updating core through the user interface. And so that's issue 3271. That was split out from a much larger pull request that previously also handled doing it automatically. The automatic part is not merged in, and that is issue 414. And it needs to be re-rolled to accommodate for this user interface that we've added to enable manual core updates. So in 1.12, manual core updates will be available to turn on via the user interface. However, they are still turned off by default. So on new installations of Backdrop, core still won't have the ability to update itself unless you turn it on through the user interface. That will probably be changed in 1.13, if we continue doing this kind of slow iteration, the user interface for turning on automatic updates will probably be enabled by default in 1.13, but the automatic updates, which will be available, will be off in 1.13, that sort of thing. So just one step at a time, slowly turning on more defaults to make it so that core eventually will be able to automatically update itself out of the box. Let's see, there's also another issue, a couple of issues related to core automatic updates. Package signing, which is issue 1992, as well as removing authorized.php, which is, 3208. Both of those issues have been tabled for now, no updates on those, and so they'll be pushed into the next milestone. All right, let's see. Next up is config translation, issue 704. The initial work for this capability has now been merged, thanks to Herb Duell's efforts, primarily who pushed forward to make that implementation a reality. So let's talk about what we got in here and what is yet to be done. So what issue 704 does is it adds APIs to make it so that when you get a translation or when you get a config value, instead of using config arrow get or the config underscore get function, you can use config get translated instead. And config get translated pulls in the string from the config file and then basically just runs it through T, the translation function. Which is basically what we've been doing already for like field labels and names and descriptions on fields. Anything that's stored in config right now that needs to be translated, we just pull it out and then we run it through T, which is essentially the same thing that 777 was doing prior to config existing at all. It would just run strings that were constant but part of site building processes. It would just run them through the T function. What we've done is we've basically formalized that and said, okay, that's still the way that we're going to do it, but we're going to build a system around tracking which strings are translated inside of config files. So what we have now is we have this new API that says get translated when you get a config T, and then config files now have the ability to keep a list of what strings need to be translated inside of their config files. So all that we have right now is the capability to expose certain strings as being translatable in config files, but we haven't actually gone through and identified all of the strings that need to be translated yet. And so there are two follow-up issues. One of them handles that particular question, and that is issue 3455. I'm not quite sure what we'll do with this. I kind of imagine that we can go through and start adding the list of translatable strings to the core code base, just kind of as we get them completed. I'm not sure, if it's really a bug fix or feature, or, but I think that as we start creating lists or finding strings in core that need to be translated, we should just start adding them to their config files so that we can iteratively start making it so that individual strings can be translated. And then in 1.13, we'll probably actually start using the new core APIs everywhere that we have them available. Okay, and then there's one other issue related to this that is also a follow-up, and that is a contrib-related issue, that the module that is used to extract strings from core itself and create the translation template files, the POT files, is the POTX module. And so the POTX module also has an issue created for it that is issue number 9 in its contrib issue queue. To make it so that the POTX module starts parsing config files to get a list of translatable strings and then adds those to the config, or adds those to the translation template files. there's a lot of moving parts to that particular issue, but I'm really glad that we have the first step completed, which is adding the capability to have translated strings instead of config files. And then from here on out, it's now updating all of our implementations to use the new capability.
Can I ask, I get the value of incrementally implementing this. Who does this have value to today? I mean, end users or site builders, it sounds like, can't use it yet. Is this something that a contrib developer might be able to use right away, or really
right now it doesn't have much of an immediate benefit for anybody, honestly.
Okay. It's setting up the next stage.
Yeah, exactly. Because the POTX module, which extracts strings, doesn't have the capability to find the strings yet. And so even if your contrib module started supporting it, it wouldn't actually, those strings wouldn't actually be pulled out by the POTX module.
Okay.
Also, yeah, with no core implementations of it in place yet, really things haven't really changed at all. Basically, there's only additions right now and no actual implementations outside of testing.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, it would be nice to have something that was real there. But as far as like end user things, it's mostly is still kind of in a coming soon. but at least there's something that actually backs that up, as opposed to it just being code stuck in a pull request. Okay, let's see. Other nice things that were merged this past week. Views now, if you use the grid display type in views, it now uses CSS grid attributes instead of an HTML table, which is very cool. Yeah, very nice. It also still has backwards compatibility, so you can still use the legacy table implementation if you so choose. But by default, when new views are created, if they are a grid display type, they will now use CSS grid, which is very cool. That's issue 2811 if you want to get some background on that issue. Let's see, we also restored views in Drupal 7 if you were using content. Actually, now I can't quite remember what this is. Okay, yeah, if you were using panels to place a block on a panel content pane, then you could pull arguments from the URL and pass them to those blocks. That capability has been restored, matching the Drupal 7 functionality in 2878. And lastly, scheduled content on the content listing. Previously, it just had published or unpublished as its status. It now also shows whether or not content is unpublished, but also scheduled. So it will say that the content is scheduled to be published at a particular time, in addition to saying that it's currently unpublished. So just a minor enhancement to the content listing page to better support the scheduled functionality that was added in 1.11. Let's see, there are a number of 1.12 issues that are actually still open. I think there's 12 of them. And these 12 issues are either cleanup tasks, things that could be done to just kind of fit within the minor updates that have just code rearrangement, like issue 361, that is just moving views out of the default views out of views module and into the respective like node and user module, for example. So that's just a minor code rearrangement, and about 10 of them are UX related issues that have a modest, a minimal amount of code change, I should actually say. So simple things like changing labels on things, or potentially like adding states, pound states to particular properties, or adding additional links in places, or just really small fixes here and there. So there are about a dozen issues that are marked in the 1.12 release related to that are, if they don't get completed, they'll just get bumped to the next minor version. That's it. Let's see. Items that did not get completed are worth noting here as well, and they've been moved to the 1.13 release, and that includes Dashboard, which was only added to the 1.12 release like a couple of weeks ago. Momentum kind of came out of nowhere behind that particular initiative. I did do some code review on that one because it did move into needs review a couple of times over the past week. And it looks really good. It's definitely a real solid start, but it's currently been tabled for 1.13 because it didn't quite get tidied up fast enough for 1.12. Also,
I want to interrupt. So I updated the roadmap for all of the stuff that we got into 1.12, and I added Dashboard to 1.13 because I'm so excited about it. I think everybody's really going to want it. And I would like to kind of put our focus on that one for the next issue because it's pretty close right now. I think we can get it in early. So I think it'll also be a great promotional feature to be able to announce that we have a useful dashboard. So.
Great. Let's see. And the other thing that we didn't get completed that we've moved to 1.13 is fieldable file types, the ability for files to have bundles and fields on them. That's issue 2632. I haven't actually checked in on this one. Jen, you said that there was some compromising going on around the scope of it. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So the main reason everybody uses file entity in Drupal 7 is because there are a ton of other modules that depend on it. And I think most of the things that those other modules needed, a la making the file an actual entity, are included in Backdrop Core. So it's less necessary in Backdrop than it was in Drupal. I think the feature of having those file types be fieldable may not be an 80% use case. And so there was a lot of conversation in the issue queue about, like, this is a lot of code. Do we really need all of this code? Should any of this be left to contrib? What are the parts of this that we do need versus don't need? And we already have a meta issue about the handling of files that includes stuff like being able to separate files by their extension type, being able to upload a file outside of the file upload form, and we sort of know the features that we need. And I think maybe fieldable is something that people are starting to feel like maybe we don't need. And so trying to figure out how to separate out the features we do need from the features we don't need from file entity module has sort of been the sticky point where file entity works in the huge conglomerate of code that it currently is. So we're tempted to just put it all in. But looking at the mass of code that actually turns out to be is making a couple people nervous, mainly Dr. Lamont and Nate, who've been doing a bunch of work on it. And there are people like me who are like, oh, let's just take little tiny pieces of it. And when I go and try and pull out like the ability to upload a file, it is complicated because you're pulling like a little bit out from all of these different parts of the module. And I'm not entirely sure my individual piece that I pulled out is going to work, at least not in the same way or as well as it did when it was all part of the huge match of code. So I think the consensus in that issue was maybe this shouldn't be scheduled for core inclusion as is. Maybe we need to revisit the pieces that are actually needed and add those individually. And because there isn't even a contrib version of file entity for Backdrop right now, people are starting to wonder like how much it that we do really need. My concern is because there isn't a contrib version of file entity and we don't have all of this functionality, there might be people who aren't using Backdrop because they feel like the functionality they need is missing. So I don't know what that means long term, whether we need to just port the module so that we have something in a state, like we could take this pull request and turn it back into a module and say, here are the pieces that we're missing. And then at least people could move forward. We'd get accurate usage counts on like how many people actually needed it. Or if we should just say, maybe it's not necessary and let's pull out the pieces we know are. So we don't know yet what's going on with that one. Nate bumped the milestone to 113, so it'll give us another 4 months to talk about it. I think we should definitely make progress on getting some of the things in, but how much of them is undetermined.
Great. Yeah, another completely different tack on that one. My big complaint was that there's just confusion around what, the functionality that file entity adds sometimes is it doesn't. It's not self-explanatory, like when combined with the stuff that core already does. And so, I mean, this is a major thing that adds a lot of functionality to files, but it also, therefore kind of adds a lot of potential for confusion because there's a whole bunch of new pages and things that are added. And maybe these things could also be solved just by better documentation of explaining what the functionality does. And also possibly like terminology improvements and things like that to make it so that we don't have like namespace conflicts between different pieces of functionality. Anyway, it's still, as it has been for all of the 1.11 release, still in a really good place as far as its implementation. Like it's still all really solid. It's basically a direct port of file entity. The parts that aren't already in core. And so we know from a stability standpoint that it's really good on that front. The implementation is good, and the likelihood of it causing regressions is fairly low because it's just code pulled from 777. So anyway, still a really good thing to continue working on, and for now it's just bumped into the next release. That does it for the 1.12 update. There's a good number of things that have gotten in, some more things that we could potentially still continue. Again, if you're looking for work to get in before the 1.12 release, check out both the 1.12 milestone and the 1.11.4 milestone on GitHub for a list of issues that are still rolling along. So that's it. Next up, we've got just kind of general discussion. If we've got anything that you guys would like to bring up to talk about. Looks like, Jen, you're preparing something topical.
Jen, are you there?
I am, and now I'm not muted. Sorry. Yes. So last week, we talked a little bit about how to better manage our milestones. Doclama in particular had noticed that there are a bunch of new issues appearing in milestones. And so if you're trying to work on the things that are in a milestone, new stuff shows up and you're like, why is this in here? Did we talk about this? Is this something one person wanted to be in a milestone, like maybe Jen? Or is this something that everybody has a consensus and agreeing needs to be in a milestone? And so he proposed a new tag that we could add to an issue, and a process that would be, if you want to get an issue into a milestone, somebody adds it with the tag, somebody else needs to go to the issue and say, yes, this is a priority, and then mark it with the milestone. And as long as there are two people who are talking about the issue who agree that it's a priority, then it can go into the milestone queue. I think for now, 2 people is probably enough. Over the long term, that might end up being really easy to get a consensus on what goes into the milestone. We might need to have some kind of a gatekeeper on the milestones, but we don't have that much activity now that I think it'll be an issue. So I've gone ahead and added a new milestone called I've added a new tag called Milestone Candidate. I think Dr. Lamont recommended a better label, milestone suggestion, something like that, which I thought could be valuable, where we could review after a release, we could review all of the issues that are tagged with milestone candidate and say, hey, are there any of these here that look like obvious contenders for, yes, we need this feature, or yes, this is a bug fix that needs high priority, or something like that. And then that way we can sort of have a list of a backlog of things that some people think are super high priorities that we can go through. If there are things in there that we think definitely aren't a high priority, we can remove the label. I don't know who the we is there, but I think having a way to organize these issues to start would be good, and we can figure out who's responsible for making decisions later. It could be something that gets kicked to the PMC. So since the PMC is responsible for deciding the future of the project, they could take a look at every upcoming milestone and say, does this look reasonable? Yes, no. And then here's the list of candidates. Is there anything in there you think is more important or less important, or however? So I think having visibility into what's going to be a milestone and how that's managed is important. I'm not sure, this is an idea. This is something Dr. Wilmot recommended. I think it's a good one. We should try it maybe and see how it goes. It also might be good to write down this process for anyone new who's coming into the core queue and wants to figure out how things work. Just having a general introduction to working in Backdrop Core. This is how issues get managed. Anyone can change their tags. This is a tag you can add. Please don't change their milestones unless, and then have the criteria there for whatever that is. Just I think a little more visibility and explanation as to how these things get decided would be good. And if we need to change how they get decided in the future, we'll have a place to update that documentation for people too. So Tim, I think you asked last week where that was updated. I don't know if you'd had any thoughts about where we should put it, like maybe in the, we have a section on backdropcms.org for developers.
We did, am I muted? No, we did. I think you suggested that we create a GitHub issue to talk about this, and an issue did get created. There hasn't been any discussion, although I think we did throw out that the proposed contributors guide on Backdrop CMS would be a place to put this. That doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to try and start working on it. So, does that make sense?
Yep. So we have this book right now. I'm just going to throw a link into Gitter. Book in the structural sense called Backdrop Developer Notes. It might be good to put our contributor guide in here.
Okay.
I don't know how it makes sense to organize it, but that might be a place where if you have developers looking at this stuff anyway and you want to give them introductions to contributors, that's good. We also have, if we're going to make a contributor guide, which I think is a great idea, we also have a bunch of stuff on the GitHub contrib group README file that might be good to include here too. So you can be a contributor to Backdrop if you never touch core. And I would love that our documentation be just as welcoming about that as about how the core process works. So just somewhere where we can send people to what is it like to work on Backdrop would be fantastic.
Sure. I think some people might argue that putting the contributor guide in the developers notes is already sort of prejudicial towards it being for developers.
Yeah, that's a good idea. A good point. But I also think some of this stuff might not be developer notes too. We could maybe revisit that terminology and see if that needs an update. So. Yeah,
I mean, there's definitely stuff in the developers notes that I think would be more appropriate or in the contributors guide. So.
Yeah, or we could just rename this contributors guide. Something like that. I don't know.
Sure, and then subsection it.
Yeah.
Yep.
However we want to handle it, it's fine.
Yeah, there is a GitHub issue to talk about the contributor guide too.
Can you throw a link to that if you have it into the Gitter channel? And we can work on cleaning that. Okay, but just that one update from last week was just that I did create a tag, and there was a ton of stuff that had been given a milestone in the last release where I removed the milestone and added the tag so that we can start trying some kind of process around moving things in with consensus. So, although a small consensus, I still think it's a good idea. All right. Let's see what else is on the agenda. That's it. General discussion. Anything else anyone wants to bring up? In the design meeting a couple minutes ago, Luke, we were talking about the Backdrop birthday parties, which should start on the 15th. So I am happy to host the first one at Sideshow, which is a burger, beer garden, kid and dog friendly, very convenient for us here in the Bay Area. But I thought that might also be a good point to kick off user groups too, because we talked about starting those.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, the clock's up. Obviously, you got to take care of that. Sideshow looks a little small. I've checked it out, and subject to weather. Those are my two concerns about.
So they have, yes, both valid concerns. They do have 2 covered areas so that if it is raining, you don't get wet. They have standing heaters so that it is not uncomfortable. I'm not sure I would call it comfortable in those situations, but we have eaten there under those scenarios. It is a little small, but it doesn't, I don't know. We haven't had problems. Like, unless they're having some kind of other party there, it'll probably be okay. We can also always relocate to other places nearby.
All right. Why don't we pencil that in with like really thick, heavy pencil at the moment, and get that all together, and I'll try to chip in with as much. I don't want to throw more things on your plate. So whatever I can organize or plan, I'll invite all of my user group people to it and promote that.
Okay. And I think it would also be fine to promote it as Backdrop and Drupal birthday party.
Yep.
Since it's the same day, you might as well celebrate both of them. I'll work on maybe a cake or something.
I was about to say. we'll have to find a cake that has all that. You beat me to it.
Sure. Just I'll throw in that I'm planning one in the Twin Cities, and we're going to just be at a tap room near my office that night with a food truck. So, well, there will be a food truck there, not for us, but
Oh.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. I might as well also make a quick plug for our virtual user group next week.
Oh,
sounds great.
Yep, I'll put a relink to it and get her for anybody.
All right.
Great. Anything else you guys want to chat about? No? Nate, anything to add? No? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and wrap this meeting, and we will return to the issue queue, focus on the few remaining issues we can definitely get in for 112, and celebrate the excitement about the upcoming release and birthday party.
Woo.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye, folks. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.